hazmat to OSHA compliance to DOT training. And we have instructors throughout the entire country, and we provide this training anywhere within the U.S. and its territory. The training is provided at no cost to the organizations because we've managed to acquire several grants that allow us to be able to perform this service. So it is an absolute pleasure for me to be able to talk with your group. And just listening to that little introduction, I am a firm believer that there's very few accidents out there. And I think if we do a little deep investigation, you'll find out that that's the case. Somewhere along the way, someone chose to not take a step that was necessary to protect themselves or to protect someone else. And it may be that they were just in a hurry, or it may just be that they weren't trained properly. And this is where we as safety professionals have an obligation to make sure our training really reaches the heart of those that we're working with. Just recently, we completed a 40-hour HAZWOPER class up in Melbourne, Florida. And the students who had come in are new students who are just trying to get into this industry. And you should just see the way they're just gobbling up all the information, how they're taking notes, and how they determined they are to take their careers even further. And I am proud to say that this is the third time we do this year. All but 3 of them got 100% on their scores. The other ones were in the low 90s, but they did excellent, and it has in part to do with our training methods. It's really important that when we go through the motions of providing training, that we stop and analyze what we're doing. Way too often we get too comfortable with what we've been doing for years, and I know I'm guilty to be one of those. I tend to, I'm one of the tactile learners, and I tend to want to have the props and the gadgets. At the same token, I enjoy seeing movies and things in action that really embed themselves into my mind, but it's important that you reach all of your students, and not everybody thinks and learns that way. So there's different tricks and techniques that are important for us to just take time to see how we can implement them into our training. And I will say this from the beginning. There is no one sure answer to all your questions. And some of these techniques may work with a group and they may not work with another group. And while I've seen a lot of peer-reviewed studies on some of these techniques, you'll still find a white paper somewhere else challenging them. So again, it's not to say that this is the only way to accomplish the training, but what we should be doing is looking for ways to make our training more interesting and training that truly reaches the minds of our students. So I'm going to go ahead and start our presentation here. And if everybody just can confirm, are you able to see the first slide?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So our goal is to be able to bring our training to life. If we're able to do that, we're doing a lot more justice to our students. And a lot of times when we go through this training, some of it may just be recertification, individuals who just have to keep up their CEU credits. But in many cases, they're students or workers who are truly looking for the answer to be able to perform that dangerous job, but in a way that that danger is mitigated and they can return home to their families, which should be every one of our goals. So as we go through this presentation, I'll just kind of be stepping in from the instructor standpoint and from the student standpoint a couple of times. But one of the things I like to start off our training with, I'm sorry, I forgot we had included this slide here. Please take advantage of going to the Sustainable Workplace Alliance, sustainablewp.org website, and you'll see all the classes that I mentioned early on that are available at no cost. And this small presentation we're going to give you guys right now is part of what you see on the left. It's a one-day technical training, train-to-trainer presentation that we can make available to your organizations if you find it interesting. And by the way, I've sent all these slides to Karen, so she has them. You're welcome to download them and use them at your discretion. But again, you'll see all the other classes that are available there at Sustainable Workplace Alliance. So generally speaking, before I get started with any of the training, I asked this question. I asked the students to take the time to think about an instructor that at one point or another touched their lives because of his effective way of teaching or training. And then I asked them to just discuss amongst themselves what topic were they teaching, what did they like about the presentation. And this is part of an exercise that we call Think, Pair, Share. So early on, before we even get started and get into the lecture mode where they're just sitting there listening to you, I break them up into small groups. And so in doing so, you get to warm them up to one another, and they get to share their experiences with one another. And once they come up with what they enjoyed best about that teaching, then we'll have one person represented from each side of the classroom go up to a whiteboard that we'll have set up. And I'll show you a trick on those whiteboards in a moment. But we go on the whiteboards and we have them write down from their groups what was it that they enjoyed about the training. And you'll have some of them say, well, I enjoyed all the pictures he showed. Great, so write that down. You'll have someone else say, I enjoyed all the stories and the personal experience that they included. Great, write that down. And you have to put all this information on the board. So you've already started the breaking in process with your students, but there's more value into what just happened. Now you, as an instructor, have an insight onto their learning perception. So those that told you they enjoyed the experiences and the stories, you know you have to include that in your training. Those that mentioned, oh, I love all the statistics and the dates when things came into law, now you know you have to address that into your training. So early on, you're able to get the group to tell you how they want to learn. And that just gives you an opportunity to just reflect a little bit further as to how you're going to go about accomplishing this training. And there was a study that was done some time ago, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but it was a study based on everybody's ability to remember 2 weeks later what they learned. And what was it about that training that allowed them to remember this 2 weeks later? And this is where we come into this pyramid here, where for all intents and purposes, if you notice on the far right, you have passive and active learning. So for passive learning, if for all intents and purposes, 10% of what a person reads, that means you and I, we may be able to remember that 2 weeks later. 20% of what we hear, maybe in a classroom lecture, we may be able to remember 2 weeks later. 30% of what they see, they're going to remember. So you notice that we're getting more and more faculties involved, and because of that, they're able to remember more. And then when we get to the other part, and we're still on passive learning, 50% of what they see and hear. So maybe watching a movie, seeing an exhibit, watching a demonstration, or seeing it done on location, 50% of that, 2 weeks down the road, they're going to be able to remember. And just kind of as a side note, for most of us who were around, and I see most of the group probably were around when PowerPoint first came out, it was an excellent tool that it first came out, and it was used in a way that was very effective, the way it was intended by Microsoft. And one of the things they'll tell you is this, that PowerPoints are to transform the student to a location that you can't take them to because they're in a classroom. So in other words, if we're having a class and we're talking about confined space training, we can't really take them into that confined space. Maybe we don't even have the gas monitors to show them, but can we show them in pictures? Can we show them maybe some small video clips of our trainings in the past? By doing that, we're transporting them out of that classroom to a real life scenario. They're seeing this, they're hearing this, and maybe 50% of this they're going to remember down the road. But then when we go further down into the active learning, 70% of what they say, they're going to remember. So giving them an opportunity to maybe speak in front of the classroom or getting them involved in a discussion, which it's really important that throughout your training, you do find moments in which you can break the classroom up into smaller groups and have discussions amongst themselves, and maybe establish one person per group as a spokesperson that can share those findings with the rest of the classroom. What you're doing is you're getting them actively involved with what they're doing. And you may actually have them come in front of the classroom and share their experience as to part of what they've learned or what they already know. And you'll see this later on in our presentation as far as those classroom disruptors. You'll always have that one person in the classroom who's constantly raising his hand, and you're trying to get more involved, but this person's hand is constantly up. If we ignore that person in time, we're going to actually isolate ourselves from that person. I have found this to be really helpful. So if, let's just say I'm going through respiratory training and I've gotten to the section where we're talking about N95s and how they're put together and their efficiency ratings and what type of APR are they, and you've got that one student constantly raising their hands, maybe during a break, and you can schedule a break whenever you want, and just tell that student personally, one-on-one, that you really appreciate their background, their information, their knowledge on this subject, that you'd like for them to present a 5-minute presentation on that N95. And now what's going to happen is this: you got control of your classroom again, because that hand's not going to keep popping up. You've addressed their attention need, and now you've given them an opportunity to come before the classroom. And I'll find that when you do that, right away, you're getting the classroom more involved, more than just lectures. Because remember what we said about lecture, 20% of that they may actually remember. And then when you go further down, and this is where it really comes into play, 90% of what we actually do, we're going to remember 2 weeks down the road. So actually doing a dramatic presentation, simulating the real experience, or just doing the real thing, truly embeds everything that you've shared with them in the lecture mode, because now they've actually got to play it out. And I believe that's part of the reason why we had such an excellent result with our last HAZWOPER training, because we spent a little bit more than 3 days out of the whole 5 days, all hands-on, where they donned a level A suit. They put on an SCBA. Of course, those that were medically evaluated too. But we had those that were prepared to do so. We're able to don all the equipment. We showed them how to set up the cold zone, the hot zone, the warm zone, how decon gets set up. And we went through this a couple of times in the classroom based on small videos and pictures, but then we gave them an opportunity to try it out. By the end of the week, when it was time for them to do their final rehearsal, everything just worked like a well-oiled machine, because they were able to hear it in the form of a lecture. They were able to ask all the questions they needed. They saw little movie snippets. They saw lots of pictures, and we gave them an opportunity to even speak up on the actual subject. So by the end of the week, everybody had the entire HAZWOPER program locked into their minds, and it made for some excellent results in our training. And I say it's really important we do this because, again, if they're going to miss 80% of what we shared with them during a presentation, the chances of them actually applying what they learn is going to become slim. By them actually trying out things and experiencing things. I'll give you an example. When we do the fall protection, we include a self-rescue portion where we teach them how to use certain equipment to rescue themselves. They walk away from that 2 things. They know that if they ever fall, they're going to be able to assist themselves if they're still conscious. And they also learn the second thing. They remember the experience of hanging in their harness, and they never want to experience that for real after the impact of a fall. So they become more conscious of their safety in their areas when they're around them. So just to kind of end this slide, it's really important that we get every one of their thinking faculties involved, because in so doing, it'll give them an ability to really embed it into their minds. And there was a study that was done some time ago, and I'm not going to be able to give you the scientific background behind it, but they explained it to us in this way, and made it as simple as possible. Every time we use one of our faculties in learning, for instance, seeing something, it's kind of like a record, a groove on a record has been established, and it creates that little memory deposit. And if we involve another faculty, maybe hearing, now we're using 2 of our faculties, so now we have like 2 different memory facets that are being developed in our brain. And when they actually get involved and they're actually speaking back what they're learning or hands-on, you get more faculties involved and more of those areas that are just engraved in their brain in different processes that allow them to remember what they're learning more effectively. So it's really important that we break up our training. And why is it important? Well, this next slide explains a lot of that. This study was done back in 1970 by Johnson and Friedman and Carver, and they were saying that for the most part, now I know you guys are probably thinking, Carlos, you're a fast speaker, and I am. I'm Puerto Rican, and I was in sign language one time, and I think it just becomes something that you speak super fast anyway. But notice what it mentions here. The average talk rate is going to be about 125 to 175 words per minute. I think I topped that a little bit. But then it says the listen rate, the average person can listen to up to 450 words per minute. So what does that mean? That 75% of the time, you're losing your student. So here I am, and can you guys see my mouse moving on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So here I am where I start my presentation, and I am just going around quoting statistics and standards and numbers. And of course, because of their ability to hear and process so much more, at some point we get to here. And what's happening here? Carlos continues with his lecture mode, and I'm losing them because of their ability to process so much more mentally. So what's happening during this stage? I'll tell you what's happening. They're on their phones, they're updating their Facebook accounts, they're looking at old Instagram pictures, they're sending an email, they're probably trying to get some work done because they can still listen to me and they can still get all this work done. So what do? At some point or another, I need to bring them back to where I'm at, in order for me to keep them closely engaged with the work that I'm doing, the training that I'm doing. And this is where we come into this nice program here about interactive segments. So see, if Carlos starts off with his lecture right here, knowing that I'm going to be losing him early on, and it doesn't mean I've lost them completely. It just means that I've allowed their mind to wander off on other things. So at some point or another, I've got to bring my lecture mode down to something where they're interactively involved, where they can't be on their phone, where they have to truly get engaged in one way or another. This is called the participatory training experience. And what happens is, once we get them down to that stage where they're involved with some kind of activity, and we'll give you an example of some of those activities, we're back on the same page. And now, once again, when I start off with my lecture mode and I'm going back to the information that's on the PowerPoints, sure, I'm going to lose them to a certain degree, or again, not lose them, but their minds may wander off to a degree. I need to find that moment once again where I can include another training experience for them that goes beyond me actually speaking. So what can I do? One of the first things that I mentioned early on was using the whiteboard. And by using the whiteboard, you're getting them out of their seats, you're getting them moving around, and you're getting them more involved in the presentation. So in this case right here, that's one of our instructors here in the first picture, Sonia. She's the one that teaches the hazmat training for us, labeling of all type of product hazardous materials. And she uses these whiteboards, and these whiteboards are really cling sheets. We buy them at Office Depot. You may have used them before, but they're great because sometimes you don't always, depending on your training environment, you may not have a whiteboard around. So these training sheets fold right up and they go right into my book, into my tablet. When I get to the classroom, I just strategically lay them up in different areas against the wall, and they're attached by static electricity. So they're just stuck on the wall, and I bring plenty of dry erase markers. So since at the very beginning, I broke them up into two groups, I separated the classrooms, they're all gathered around each other at each corner of the room where these sheets are at, and they're writing down their experience when it came to learning. And I have plenty of those throughout the room because we're going to use them multiple times. But in doing so, we've given them an opportunity to get out of their seats, get the blood circulating once through their brain, because as one of our instructors says, the brain will only tolerate as much as the tail end can tolerate. So the longer you keep them sitting and not moving around, eventually they get uncomfortable and we start losing their train of thought. So these cling sheets or these whiteboards are an effective tool that we use. In addition, it'll help you as an instructor to determine how effective you've been in your training is by being able to determine their knowledge beforehand and their knowledge afterhand. So we always start off our trainings with some type of pre-test. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It could be a simple 10-question test, and being able to evaluate that for ourselves with a post-test to determine really how much they learned. Was there a learning curve in our training? You may find out that there is a learning curve, but everybody missed question number 9. Well, if everybody missed question number 9, then I can pretty much assure you that the person responsible for that is me, the instructor. I did not explain question number 9 sufficiently. So we see the value of being able to use this in our future training so that we know that we actually include all the questions that they're going to be confronted with in a test. And just as a side note, we'll talk a little bit about PowerPoints in a moment, but when you're preparing your PowerPoint, you could do two things. Normally, in my instructor's notes, I will have each question that is on that slide that will be found on the test later on. And when you see that comment pop up on the slide, there might be a little light bulb image that pops up next to it. As you're going through your training, it's good to get your audience already ready for what they're going to find on their test, and maybe say comments like, I pay close attention to this because you might see this later on, or now would be a good time to take some notes. Or every time you see that little bulb pop up next to a comment, know that you're going to find that later on. What you've done is you've put them on high alert. So as you're talking, they start listening for these key phrases, and you should see, as soon as you say it, every pencil goes down and they start taking notes. And it gives them an ability to be better prepared for their test. Some of these tests, you could actually use this program called Poll Everywhere. I absolutely love with Poll Everywhere, you're able to come up with data and information that's provided to you anonymously. Nobody actually puts their names down or anything like that. I'll give you an example. In Puerto Rico, immediately after the hurricanes, we did a lot of fall protection training. We had all kind of workers showing up there to work on roofs. And I don't know if it's just Puerto Rico or it's just a manly thing, but you know, putting on a harness just is the hardest thing for them. So early on, we used Poll Everywhere, and we had a simple question. And the question was, the reason why I don't use my fall protection equipment is, and then we gave them several answers. One, I've never received training. One, I don't even have the equipment. Two, no one's ever told me I needed it. And just silly answers like that. But you were trying to get into their minds. And what happens is they pull out their phones, they log on to Poll Everywhere, and they're just clicking 1 as my response or 2 as my response. And right there on your PowerPoint in real time, you have a graph that starts forming, and it starts changing in real time as they start responding to the question. And before it's all said and done, I can look at it, and the very top answer was, I've never been provided the equipment. So now you know what direction your training needs to go into when you're talking about fall protection. Why haven't they been provided equipment? Do their employers know that it's a legal obligation to provide them that equipment? Are they a small business and they can't afford their equipment? But get down to it. By using this Poll Everywhere, it just gives my training a different route to go to than maybe I had planned on at the very beginning. And quite honestly, it doesn't really matter what I have planned on if it's not of no benefit to the students. So we want to get into the minds of the students, what they actually want, what they're actually lacking in, so that we can provide them with some type of feedback or some type of assistance when it comes to that. Another program that I use a lot, and mind you, these programs that I'm mentioning here along the way, these are part of those participatory training programs that we were talking about, experiences that you use to break up from the lecture mode. You know, make sure that all of this is prepared in advance. What's great is that with Kahoots and also Poll Everywhere, and I think a lot of other apps just like this, they have a add-on that you can put on that allows you to embed it right into your PowerPoint. So you don't have to leave your PowerPoint to find a browser to log in or anything like that. You can actually just embed it and it becomes part of your PowerPoint. With Kahoots, this is an excellent tool, and it's really simple to work with if you haven't done it yet. It gives you the ability to create a series of questions, like an exam, and then come up with multiple answers, and everybody logs in. And normally I tell them, don't even use your real name. Because we just kind of want to get a consensus of where we are in the classroom. And normally with Kahoots, I'll have the first 25 questions of the HAZWOPER exam included in them. Now, they're not the exact questions, they're just similarly worded. The answers all change too, so it's not like they can write down, well, the answer to 1 is going to be B. It doesn't work that way. But if they're taking notes, it's going to be super helpful for them. So they go through these 25 questions, and at the end, we're able to see who really knew the answers. And you could also use it as part of your training event. So if you have a question on there and it's specifically asking, you know, at what height do I need to have fall protection for my workers in the construction industry? And you've got 4, 6, 8, and 10. Most of them are clicking 4. Ask the audience, why did we select 4? And you'll have some that'll say, well, I work in a warehouse and that's what everybody told me. Well, he's absolutely right. So confirm that he's correct and confirm that, yeah, OSHA has standards and it does change from industry to industry. So you're right. In the general industry, it is at 4 feet. However, in construction, which is what we're training about today, it starts at 6 feet. And then you can explain some of the reasons why we established, or OSHA established, a 6-foot rule. So by using this as part of the exam and allowing them to take notes, you're not giving them the answer. you're working the answers out together with them. You're going through all the wrong answers and explaining why that probably would not really apply to this case. And it gives you an opportunity to just prepare them for the exam that they're about to get. And just as a little side note before I leave this, so when you go to Kahoot, you create your own account. If you're an educator, I believe the account is for free. We've been using it for so long, I don't know if the company's paying for it now. It used to be free in general, and then they started a small charge on this. But I promise you, it's absolutely worth it. And for most of you who are thinking, well, I'm not that creative in putting these tests together and these games and things like that, that's perfectly fine. When you go to Kahoot, you can just search somebody's Kahoots. Because when you create your Kahoots, you have the ability to make them public. So anybody can use my HasWhopper 40 Kahoots that I have set up on the Sustainable website page. So it gives you an opportunity to work off somebody else's. And then that way you don't have to do all the legwork for it. Just a word of caution. If you're going to use somebody else's, go through all the questions and answers yourself before you present it. I've had cases where we're presenting information that's not accurate. Maybe the person just forgot to click the right box. So make sure it's accurate before you actually present it. And then, for the most part, so we're talking about ways to break up our lecture or our training. For the most part, every one of us will use PowerPoint. And PowerPoints can really have a tremendous impact on what you're doing. They can give you the direction that you should be moving. What they should not be doing is providing the training for you. In fact, if you can look at a PowerPoint and for all intents and purposes, read most of the information without the instructor and learn something, that's not really a good PowerPoint. You want the instructor to be able to provide the information to the worker, because if they see so much information on the screen, they're just going to get discombobulated in their way of thinking and their way of trying to learn. So here's an example. So imagine this is a slide on my PowerPoint. Here I have challenge your assumptions about adult learning by providing a counter argument to established rules. And then to make it really warm and cute, I include this. So just out of curiosity, if anybody can answer, let's just say this was a slide in my PowerPoint. Please tell me, what is wrong with this slide? Anyone?
It just draws the attention to the picture and everything else is kind of in the background.
Absolutely. Let me tell you, when Microsoft first came out with this program and they had those cute little clip arts, back then we didn't have the ability to surf the internet like we did for pictures or look at our own training pictures. So that clip art was, the next best thing to sliced bread. Let me be the one to tell you, and I hope Microsoft's not listening. Please do not use Microsoft clip art. It's not real world for the student who's trying to learn. If you're going to use pictures, use your own pictures, first of all. That way you don't have to worry about permissions or anything like that, but use your own pictures. Take time to take pictures throughout the training so that you can take them to the scene. Again, remember the goal of PowerPoint, to transport the student to a location that they're not right there. So transport them to the scene. And also, do you remember this little subtitle just kind of doing a flip? Again, that was a feature that was put into PowerPoint, but not really effective for us as instructors. Maybe they use that for another application, but not really good for us. But what else do you see in this PowerPoint here that kind of makes it a little challenging for a student?
Different fonts.
Absolutely. What was the last one?
Too much to read.
Absolutely. There's way too much information to read. Then this would probably be us when we first started training and we weren't familiar with the material and we felt the need to have that much information on the screen just for our comfort level so that if I forgot something, I could turn back to the screen and read it, right? That's not effective training. As we start working with these PowerPoints, and again, here's one of those rules that don't hold me to it because I know they kind of change quite a bit, but there's rules that they say that when it comes to PowerPoint, to use the 5x5 rule. In other words, have no more than 5 sentences, and those sentences should just include 5 words. That's it. The rest of the information should be in your head. If it's not in your head, or you just might feel uncomfortable trying to remember all of it, it could be in your instructor's notes, which everybody knows, I'm sure, that when you're presenting your PowerPoint, you have an option to click on Presenter View, which allows you to present the actual slide that's up there, but have all your notes directly in front of you. And there might be some little tweaking you might have to do on your computer for that to actually work. But using Presenter View allows you to have all the notes that you need down there. But hopefully we've all done this training so often that the information is just stored in our head, that 5 words along 5 lines on that presentation is going to work for me, and I'm going to be able to remember the points that I wanted to share with them. Just a word on pictures to use. If you look at, and I know we got someone from OSHA here, so please don't hold this against me. when we look at the information, when you go to OSHA.gov and you go to Susan Harward training materials, you'll find a lot of information that was presented there that we have, the liberty to be able to use. For the most part, you'll find that every time you download those, statistics need to be updated. And here's the worst one. The pictures were taken back in 1925. They're either super grainy, they're not clear enough to really see, and they're not transporting the students to that location. So take the time to research the pictures that you need for your presentation and include them. Quite honestly, a slide with a picture alone is enough talking information for you to cover a specific point. And then if you have to have a little sentence at the bottom that says, this comes from OSHA Standards 1910.134, then have that information there, but guide them there by means of a picture. But when you are searching for pictures online, understand that you can't just use anybody's pictures without permission. There's certain videos that we like to use. For instance, I like to use the monkey business video, which talks about a person being distracted and not really focusing on their actual assigned task. We actually wrote the organization that created that video and got written permission from them to use it and embed it into our PowerPoints. So that's great. If you're able to do that, the same thing with images. Also know that if you're going to search for images online, I prefer, this is just my preference, to use Bing instead of Google. Search Bing for images. Bing will just give you some higher quality images, and you'll have the option to select if you want a large image, small image, medium image, and then you also have an option to click on free to use by public, Creative Commons, or just different categories that determine how far you have to go to the level of getting permission to be able to use that picture. But just again, emphasis, if the picture is not yours, you have to get permission to be able to use that unless they're making it available to the public on the internet by means of one of those image searches. But my thought has always been this. You're the one that's teaching this class over and over again, and I'm sure at some point or another, you've performed some kind of practicals in this class, or you've seen the work in action in your facility. Take the time to shoot your own pictures. There's nothing better than if you're teaching your own organization and you're talking about confined spaces, for them to look at that a picture of, yeah, I know exactly where that boiler is. That's on the other side of the warehouse. And now the training has become more site specific for them, and they're going to make that connection as you go on through the training. So additionally, this is where, they say PowerPoints have gone bad. If you're using too much information, too much wordage, if there's just way too many bullet points, or you're using these little cheesy pop-up arts that you see there, it's going to make it difficult for the person to get involved. Here's a recommendation to you, and I'm not getting paid for this recommendation. If you haven't looked at this book, I strongly recommend you do. You can get it from Amazon. It's made by Rick Altman. He's the one that wrote it, and it was very powerful. Why most PowerPoint presentations suck, and how you can make them even better. In that book, it talks about a lot of what we just mentioned about the pictures, the fonts, and then it reminds you of how if you are using a PowerPoint to not turn your back to the audience to read them, because now two things, you're reading off the board, which they're capable of doing for themselves, but in addition, you've turned your back to them and you're projecting toward a screen, and you're not projecting toward the audience, and many of them may not even hear what you're actually saying. But it's also mentioned in this presentation, the book here, that for the most part, regardless of our background, regardless of how many years we ended up in college, or whether we finished high school or not, they found that studies show that the average person is just more comfortable. Not saying that you're not qualified to do better, but just more comfortable in reading at 8th grade level. Look that up. You'll find that there's information stating that at 8th grade level. What does that mean? That sometimes we kind of have to dumb down our terminology, so to speak, and I hate using that word dumb, but just kind of bringing it down to some real earth explanation to the students so that it makes sense to them. There's nothing worse than starting off a new class and your instructor is up there and he's just spitting out acronym after acronym and he's talking about PELs and the APR and an IDLH, and you have 1 or 2 students out there who don't know, have no idea what those acronyms stand for, and you can be sure one thing, they're not going to embarrass themselves to raise their hands and say, hey, what does IDLH stand for? So don't put a student in that position where they're just missing out on that depth of knowledge because you didn't explain it. So normally what we would do is at the very beginning, we would use the acronym along with the explanation of the acronym. So as you're going through the training and you say, well, we never want to use this respirator in an IDLH, that would be an immediate danger to your life or health. And then halfway through your presentation, if you want to stop the explanation, you can. But at the very beginning, give them an opportunity to write down what those acronyms are so that they truly understand what it is that you're sharing with them. Another thing that studies have shown is that using a specific font, one specific font, is more effective because it's more readable than others. And that specific font, they've said, is Verdana. Or is it Verdana or Veranda? Yeah, Verdana. They say that by using Verdana as your font for your PowerPoints, it makes it easier for someone to read even from the back of the classroom. And just to make sure that the information is read by everybody in the classroom, remember, if we're not cluttering that screen with so much verbiage, we can do this. Change your fonts up to a higher level. They say anywhere between 28 and 32 is perfect. It allows anyone from the front and anyone from the back to be able to clearly read what's on the screen. So you're giving everybody an opportunity to learn equally. And you'll find that some of these things are challenged by other studies, but this is what we've been doing for the past 6 years now with this training with Sustainable, and we have found it to be very effective. So in addition, sometimes we'll find ourselves, there's a lot more that goes on with this PowerPoint presentation. So I just strongly, again, recommend that you purchase that book and just see the wealth of information that you'll find in it. In addition, you should be able to find some YouTube videos that explains some portions of what you'll find in this book. So at some point or another, I'll be called into an organization to provide a mock safety walkthrough of their facility. So the goal would be is to walk through there and find things that they're either in compliance in or not in compliance with. And I just want to clarify, I'm not an OSHA officer. This is just a service that we provide to our clients. And what we do is it allows us to provide them some very site-specific training. So I may have my set of PowerPoints that I want to use for this organization, but before I do that, I like to go through the facility and just kind of bring myself up to date with where they are when it comes to safety. So you're looking for a couple of things. You're looking for things that they're not compliant in, and it'd probably be a good idea to let them know so that they can get that rectified right away. And then you're also looking for good things that, they've met the letter of the law or they exceeded the letter of the law in going down that road on safety. Document those things and shoot pictures of those things so that now, before you give your presentation, your safety training to that group, now you can get your notes, which includes all these things you found good and bad about their facility, along with the specific pictures of their facility, and you include those into your PowerPoint presentation. So here's an example. For instance, I provided this safety walkthrough to this one company, and I found that these are some of the standards that either they were doing really good on or they need to be improved on. Now, you'll have some people out there that their way of thinking is exactly what you see here. Give me the facts. Show me the standard where it comes from. In fact, I want to know the date it was established as law. This is just the way of thinking, and that's fine because we talked about earlier, you need to be able to reach each one of the students one way or another. So, but filling out a report and giving it back to an organization and handing them just this might work for that person who was looking for the audit, but this is not going to work for me to teach when I go back to that facility and I try to share these good or bad points with the workers there. So for example, these same exact points, breaking it down by slide. So here we go. We start our presentation with the group and we're going to talk to them about, so the same standard is there. We talk about the fact that the employer shall provide the following respirators for employees to use in an IDLH atmosphere. But now I got a picture of that actual confined space in their facility. So now the student is able to see the standard. They understand what we're talking about is respirators, because at this point, I'm free to talk about the specific respirators that you would use in an IDLH. I'd be able to talk to them about SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, or whatever other equipment they might be able to use in this type of atmosphere. But while I'm talking and sharing these things, they're seeing a standard right in front of them, and they're making that mental connection with that picture because they know that this is located just 30 feet away from where they work. So that was one of the points that we found in our audit. Now we go to the next point. Here we go. The fact that a full face pressure demand SCBA that's certified by NIOSH has a minimum service life of 30 minutes, or depending on their actual containers, you could include that information in there. So here as I'm discussing this use of this SCBA and the fact that it gets certified by NIOSH, the student is able to see the standard, the OSHA standards that says why this is law and explains why this is effective. And now they're all actually looking at their own PPE. This is their PPE that their company has purchased for them that is sitting there in their bags for them to use when it's time. So now they're able to ask me specific questions, like Mr. Almeida, so there's a dial at the very bottom on the right. I've always tried to figure out what that's for. Now you're able to share that with them. But I've gone away from just kind of going back, using this as a report from what my findings to using this as a teaching tool for the students. And again, there's a couple more. I won't spend too much time on them. I'm talking about the combination of a full face system along with a self-contained air supply. So that would be the small escape bottle. So I would explain to them how it works, the limited length on the line that can't be more than 300 feet. And if they're going to be working in an IDLH, it's got to have an escape bottle, and understand that the escape bottle doesn't mean you can work longer. It's to give you enough time to leave the area. So this is all information I can share with the students as we're going through this training, and their eyes are fixed on the standard. They can jot those notes down, and they can look at this individual knowing that that's Tony who works with me in the shop. And now they remember this because it applies to someone that they're familiar with. It's not just an image that was downloaded from Google. So again, I think this is the last one right here in talking with that. So here we have an example of different bottles that can be used in that IDLH. And once again, they have a standard. We can go into all the explanation we want. Students get to ask questions about that specific gear because that's their PPE. And then going over the confined space area that they have, talking about the fact that it's a legal requirement to have that signage there. And then maybe even explain to them the hierarchy of controls. Where does the signage come into play? Go through the whole hierarchy of controls until you get down to administrative. And there you go. This is part of those administrative standards that we do to make the place safer for the actual worker, and give them an opportunity to ask questions on that. In addition, sometimes when we're doing our presentations, you'll notice, and this is a good idea to do anyway, if I'm going to a different facility, I'll go to OSHA.gov and I'll do an establishment search on that organization. Sometimes you'll find that there's absolutely nothing to be discovered at OSHA.gov, and that's great. But what you may find is that there's other companies that do the same thing they do, and look at some of their fines and the reasons for their fines. And then further on, if you go into these actual citations, you're reading the citations for them, you're giving them information that's going to benefit them as an organization. What you don't want to do is present an entire letter in front of them, which if this is a two-page, which it is a two-page letter, suddenly they have too much information and they're going to be trying to read the entire 2 letters while I'm talking. And I don't want them to do that. What I want them to do is focus on the part of the letter that I want them to see. So here, by using, there used to be an app, and it's still out there. It's called Snagit. With Snagit, you're able to get all kind of images, cut and tear pieces of it like you see here, and display it in this fashion so that it gives you exactly what you need and nothing else. And then I actually had one of my students tell me that I was paying for an app that I didn't need because Microsoft has it built in. I think they call it Snippet. So here's another tool that you want to use when you're putting together your PowerPoint presentations. So here we have a letter. I want them to clearly see and explain clearly, this is not your organization, but it's a company who does the same exact thing you guys do. And notice this violation that fell under the 29 CFR 1910.151C, and explain to them what happened and just highlight for them. What's happening here is because it's highlighted, your eyes are going to jump to those things. You guys are going to jump here, and then my point of this whole slide is to take you down here, that it costed this company $10,780, the penalty they received because of violating this. If you lay it out this way, you may still have a worker or two that will try to read everything that's on that page, but if you've highlighted it, you've pointed their eyes in the direction of what you wanted to cover, and then you can move on from there. Most of you already know this. When you go to the OSHA.gov website and you're looking up the standards, you'll always have a question or two pop up. And then you end up with the answers from OSHA to those questions, and we refer to those as letters of interpretations. Sometimes we can use those letters. So here's an example of using one of these letters where this one person wrote into OSHA, and OSHA replied to them. The question had to do with using N95 filtering face piece for voluntary use. And we all know that the answer to that they need to provide the information that's found in Appendix D in order, and also make sure that it's not creating a greater hazard for that worker. But in sharing this with the company that I'm providing the training with, again, there's absolutely no need to look at dates and who the company and what they're writing. This is a letter of interpretation. And quite honestly, if they need all that detail, I encourage them to go to OSHA.gov and look these things up for themselves. But as a trainer, this is all I want you to focus on, because that was my whole point of this presentation right now with this company. It's just to remind them that if you are going to make them voluntary use, there are a couple other standards you have to take into consideration. And not to mention that now we also have the additional issues going on with the COVID and the use of N95s and other types of masks. You might have other questions like that are going to pop up. Be prepared to provide the latest information, and not just your opinion, but the latest information, maybe recommendations from the CDC. So again, I'm not going to put the entire page. I'm going to give them the snippet that they need in order to be able to get the information that they're asking for. In addition to stopping my training through these little moments where we can get everybody else involved, sometimes I'll throw something like this into the presentation, 2 truths and a lie. And I would make it so that this question is actually going to be one of the questions that they're going to see on their test. And remind them of that. So as we go through this one slide, give everybody an opportunity to answer the question. And of course, we give them the right answer. It's not every 24 months. It's within 90 days of employment, and then every 3 years afterwards. And use that as a learning tool, a teaching tool, and let them know you may see this later on. Again, it opens up that queue, and they know that they need to be taking really close notes. So in the full day course that we have this best practice class, one of the things that we will do is we'll actually answer everybody, including the instructor. It's a 50-question exam. We do it online, and the link is provided for the students, and it's for them to be able to determine which type of training or learning personalities do they have? What type of person are they in general? Are they any one of these, a pragmatist, an analyst, a realist, an idealist, or a synthesis? Which type of thinking do they have? And remember, you kind of gathered some of this information early on by asking them what they enjoyed about certain teaching events. But now that we've done that, I give them an opportunity. Now that they've completed that little exam they do and they know what type of thinking they are, now they have an idea. If you're going to establish a safety committee for your company, We don't have names of people here, but we have their qualities. Who would you assign these things to? So who should be the regulations expert? And then using your PowerPoint, click, that goes to the analyst. That's that person who's constantly thinking analytical numbers and things like that. Who should write the safety program? Bam, that goes to the synthesis. And you explain why it goes there. Who would you assign as a safety inspections? Well, here's your realist. Here's the one that actually says, well, in the real world, this is how things work, and they try to implement those safety trainings. Who conducts training? You go through them. Actually, 2 different qualities of people can be used for that. Who does the paperwork? Everything goes back to the analyst. Who should be the chairperson? There we go. Or who should be responding to complaints? You know, the idealist. So because those that took the full day course, they will have learned each one of these thinking abilities and learning abilities and the different characteristics that people have. And they will learn one thing early on is that I'm usually just 1, maybe 2 of those. But for the most part, I can assure you, you have all 5 in your classroom. And it's important that we reach all 5 of those. So you're going to have those analysts. These are the guys that want to hear dates and figures and give me the specific OSHA standard or the ANSI standard. They want names and numbers. Then you're going to have the realist. He's the one that's constantly going to question you and saying, yeah, I know you say to wear the harness that way, but in the real world, okay, well, give me your explanation and I'm going to explain to you how you can still make it happen. You have your idealist, which is the ideal person that you would want have responding to complaints. And then you just kind of go through the whole process of helping them to understand that not everybody thinks the same. And because of that, not everybody learns the same. And as individuals, we have to determine who am I and how far outside of my own box do I have to go to in order to be able to reach my students. And that should be everybody's goal, is to be able to reach those students. So as we continue going on through this presentation, and again, I apologize if I'm moving quickly through this, all these slides will be made available to you, and this is all part of a whole, it's about a 7-hour course that we do. We normally do it in person. We can do it through Zoom if absolutely necessary. But if your task for this week is to be able to teach your students how to fill out an OSHA 300 log properly, when you look at that form, and you all have seen this form, at one point or another, you just realize that the fonts are tiny and trying to explain this to the students is going to be relatively difficult. And how am I going to be able to thoroughly explain section by section? Well, for one, I strongly recommend that you break down this training and not make it all try to cover it all within a couple hours. So for instance, as we go through this training, and you could do this section by section. At this point, we've reached section F. Well, I use again my clip art or clip it from Microsoft to be able to bring that section out further, because see, I don't want you distracted by the rest of this form. This form is there's a lot of information that's going to end up on it, and it's requiring a lot of attention. But I just want your attention now on this section F. And now you're able to do it in a way that makes sense to them as they go through this training. And I've normally taken this training and broken it down into 2 sessions because there's quite a bit involved. It's not just the OSHA 300 log. We know the other forms and the information, the data that we have to acquire to fill out that form. But taking the time to break things down like this, I think the biggest thing that I just want to bring out from this slide is that it's really important that if it cannot be read from the back, magnify it for them. You do that so that they stay engaged with your actual training. It's just really important we do that. Finally, by now you should have realized how many, and you're going to find this to be the case, how many in your group are individuals who absolutely love stories. Individuals who love hearing your personal experience, and be prepared to include those personal experiences in the training. And I've told a lot of trainers this that have attended this class in the past. Maybe you haven't actually gone through that specific experience. Maybe you haven't worked around confined spaces or worked around excavations, but you've gone through these trainings. So as you've gone through these trainings, you've heard stories. Well, as many of my instructors have told me, plagiarize my stories. Just use my story, not to say that it's yours, but just use my story so that you can have a better, clearer picture as to what you're training. So being able to get the hearts involved or tugged, so to speak, with the worker is really important. So this is something that we, not this specific example, but we have used it in some of our training. Most of you might know this ship. It's the USS Oriskany. And for some time, this ship just spent a great time from the top of Florida over there close to the Panhandle. It traveled from there over to Texas and back. And what had happened was they had decided that they were going to sink this ship. And as you know, because of our standards here in the United States, we have OSHA, we have EPA, and how many other governmental agencies that are going to be involved in this sinking of the ship. So we know the process. We know that they had to clean this ship. They had to remove all the oil, all the plastics, the wirings, and things like that. Well, in the process of this being decided on, at one point we had a hurricane coming over to Florida, so the ship was sent over to Texas, spent some time over there, and in that same ship, while they were still trying to determine if they were meeting all of EPA's regulations, then Texas wanted to keep it. And to make a long story short, it finally came back to Florida, and they actually sunk this ship. But here's the details of that. So it was sunk back in 2008. They made a natural reef of it, and it's used by divers today. But here's the interesting: the Navy's cost of sinking this retired ship on this reef, or to make a reef, went from $2.8 million, which is what they thought it was going to cost, to $12.73 million because of delays, permits, the whole cleaning process, and everything else that's involved. So using this as a story to explain to everybody why we do things. We never talk down, EPA makes us do this. No, we do it for a reason. We're protecting the environment for our children. So we go through all these procedures. We want to make sure the workers are safe. This is why we remove fuels, we remove oils. We do all things in the proper way. And once you get everybody involved in this story, and you could even show a brief clip on it, it's available on YouTube, then you can take them to the other side of the world. And I would strongly recommend that students, you give them the homework to look this up. There's a 2-hour documentary on YouTube. It's called Echoes of Shipbreaking. Echoes of Shipbreaking. When you watch that story and you have the students play it back to you, the goal is, what are we trying to do? We're trying to use stories to get the audience emotionally involved. And trust me, you're going to get a lot of stories out of this. For number one, they expect that every 3 to 4 weeks, someone is going to die in the shipbreaking industry. That's just a given. They expect that's going to happen. And now the family who has that, loved one working at that facility understands that if their family member dies, could be their breadwinner, their husband, could be their son, a brother, when they die, they're going to get $80. That's the compensation that family is going to get. And then here's the sad thing. When the family goes to the morgue to visit their loved one for the last time, they end up with this gut-wrenching decision. I got $80 for your death, and it's going to cost me close to the entire $80 to bury you. And most of the families will not, because they just lost the breadwinner. So now they have to go home and see how far they can stretch that $80 out until they get another person that's working in their household. In the meantime, these loved ones are just stuck in a coroner's office, and then just end up being buried in public grounds. Why? Because they don't have OSHA. They don't have EPA. They don't have all these governmental agencies. So on account of that, deaths and injuries, serious injuries continue to happen. And, when you use a picture like that, usually you'll get a couple of giggles out of the audience, so that's his face shield. Yeah, that's his face shield. That's all he has. And if you look closely, he does not have steel-toed boots. In fact, he doesn't have shoes at all. You look further, that face plastic is also his respirator from whatever's off-gassing that he's cutting there or grinding. So take the time to explain all these things, but I would first give the audience an opportunity to point out what they see, and then explain to them how that wouldn't happen in the United States because of this OSHA standard that requires this or that. And now you're getting their emotions involved with the training. And generally speaking, people like to hear stories. If they're your personal stories growing up in the industries and trying to learn things, they take those things to heart. If there's stories from research that you have them do in advance, or tiny video clips that you bring out, these stories, once again, because they're part of that moving picture, it's an image, they're more engaged, they're going to remember that 2 weeks down the road. It's going to have an impact on them. In fact, I can't tell you how many students later on in our discussion with them will still keep bringing things out about the echoes of shipbreaking and other videos that they found similar to it. In fact, our graduates that we just had from our HAZWOPER class, on the little chat that we created with the students, for days afterwards, they were all sending me bits and data of what they learned about the Love Canal up in New York, because that was one of their required research projects with the HAZWOPER. So because of getting them involved, you can see how it's more than just lecturing them, and you're keeping up with their ability to learn and process, because I can't speak fast enough. The brain will lose them within 75% of the time of me talking, because they're just constantly occupied with something else. And just kind of a side note, going back on that, because our brains are the way they are and we can process so much more than we're actually taking in, I normally tell the students, everything I like to do, especially now with COVID, is all electronic. I don't do paper tests or anything like that. It's a screenshot, it's a QR code, and you take the test online. So I give the students the opportunities to keep their phones. Respect them as adults. They're not children sitting in a classroom, but at the same time, ask for your respect in return. Ask, please, not to be updating your Facebook account, looking up TikTok videos or whatever the young kids are doing today. That way you're dignifying them and you're asking to be respected in the same way. And then also keep in mind that everybody learns a little bit different. I had this one student who never made eye contact with me throughout the entire training and was just constantly doodling on his piece of paper. And it did not look like notes. It just, like he was doodling. And it just kind of frustrated me because everybody else was giving comments and he really wasn't. It wasn't until the end of the training that he came up with some of the greatest questions. And I picked up on it right away. He did not miss a beat. And when I looked down at his page, he had this elaborate, I don't know if you've ever seen someone do this in pencil, elaborate flower that was drawn out. It was like a 4-dimensional flower that he had just drawn in the upper right-hand corner. Well, why? Because he's one of those tactile learners. His hands have to be in motion for him to learn. So while he doesn't have a respirator in his hand to inspect, or he doesn't have anything else to play with, he just doodles. And that's just the type of learner he is. So don't ever discourage someone from doodling, because you may find out quickly you're stifling their learning ability. So I quickly learned that that's one of those individuals that I have to reach in my training and making sure that I'm effective to them. And in this case, making sure I have more things that they can touch and feel in order to be able to go get the most out of that training. And just kind of wrapping it up, the rules of engagement that we always do through our training is minimize the lecture mode. Keep it to a minimum. I have actually found those little time periods where we tend to lose students. It's usually anywhere from 25 to 45 minutes. It happens along there. And the best way to know that is just keeping eye contact on your students. When you start seeing students are just looking out the window or they stop being as engaged as they were when they first started, no, that's your time frame for you to change and do something interactive to get them involved, maybe get them out of their seats, get that blood flowing back into their brain, but just get out of the whole lecture mode if we really want training to stick with them. And use a warm-up exercise, which is what I do with them at the very beginning. Talk to me. Tell me what you enjoyed most about that one instructor. Who was that instructor? What was his name? What did he teach you? How did he teach you? What did you like most about his training? Asking all these questions in that group session and having them jot all that information on the board, for them, it's just a warm-up exercise. For me, I just received all the information I'm going to need for my training as I go through this presentation with them. So having them involved with the participatory learning, by them getting involved, breaking them up into small groups, making sure we use things like Kahoots or Poll Everywhere, and there's just a variety of other programs out there that are available like that, that allow you to change your PowerPoint from a PowerPoint presentation to more of a lively discussion. And then finally, this section right here, we have to be able to speak to every personality type. And while there's some that will tell you that some of these personalities can be, broken down to just 5 classes. You saw the 5 classes that we had listed there. Some will tell you that it's more. Some will tell you that it's 8. Some will say that it's 10. That's fine. I'm not going to argue that. What I am going to insist on is that nobody learns the same. So take time to know who your students are, understand how they learn, by those answers that you got early on, and then make sure that you, if it means getting out of your comfort zone, get out of your comfort zone to keep your presentation and your training alive and reach those individuals with their specific needs that they need. And then finally, PowerPoint should just be a supplement. It really should be a supplement. A lot of the trainings that we have, if you have the ability to create your own training materials, follow everything that you saw in that book by Rick Altman, and you'll see that your presentations will just come back to life. It's very good every so often, and I do this, I'm sure a bunch of you do. I will teach the 8-hour refresher on a regular basis. It's very good every so often for you to attend one of those classes yourself. And just see how the other teachers are teaching. Find out what styles that they're using. Attend other training events. Because if not, what's going to happen is you're going to get to that mode where you're just going to start going through the motions. And I just kind of concluded with this one personal experience. When I got out of high school, I got involved in construction right away. And one of the trainings that I got was to be able to use aerial lifts. Well, after working with them for about 3 years, the company needed to be able to reach higher levels. So I had to get certified to operate a 180-foot boom lift, 180 feet. That's scary. I mean, you get up there and you hit the controls to move over a foot and you swing 3 or 4 feet back and forth. So we went through this training because, number one, it was required for the work, and we needed to have that certification, and we needed to have that plastic card. Well, here came an instructor from the company who actually rents out the equipment, and this person sat down reading from the owner's manual, read the entire book for the most part. And every so often, he would look up from the book and look around at everybody and ask, are there any questions? And then he would go back into his book. There wasn't even a PowerPoint involved. There was no personal experiences. There was no pictures. We weren't even looking at diagrams inside the owner's manual. And after the entire day of doing this, it was time for practicals. Well, he didn't really control his time properly. So out of the group of 20, only 3 of us got to do the actual hands-on practicals. The rest of us didn't. That did not stop him from certifying us, and every one of us received 5 days later that little plastic card that said, yep, Carlos was trained and authorized to be able to operate a 180-foot boom. That's dangerous. That really is. And for us to think that we can just go through the motions when we're talking about safety, we're talking about the difference between a worker returning home or not, we really need to put more time and emphasis into our actual training. I imagine that instructor at one point was probably an excellent instructor, maybe when he first started. But after doing that for so many years, we become lackadaisical and we just kind of go through the motions. And I know I have a 3-hour presentation, I should be done by 2 o'clock. No, it shouldn't be like that. It should be as close to site-specific as you can to the organization, and it should involve reaching every individual based on their learning styles, getting them involved with all these exercises, and making sure that we give them an opportunity to see, feel, touch, experience what we're trying to share with them. And that brings us to one of the last presentations, which you saw at the very beginning. If you want to learn more about that one-day technical training class, you can reach out to Brian at sustainablewp.org or Sarah. She's usually there at the office. And if you go to our website, you'll see all the other courses that are being made available, and all of these through a grant, so it should not cost your organization anything at all. And then finally, just as a reminder, when you go to that Sustainable WP website, you're going to find a map with these little dots showing you where all our training classes are taking place. So if you have fellow students or individuals that you're familiar with that are in these locations where the training is taking place and they would like to sign up to these classes, get them to sign up for it as soon as possible. The seats fill up relatively quickly. Our instructors have a wealth of background of information. We have a couple that are retired firefighters and used to work with the bomb squad in Los Angeles. They do an excellent job in providing training in relations to things like that. And our gal that teaches the hazardous material training class has been doing this most of her life. Has her own company that does this. So she's very effective in her teaching. But we always look forward to your input on any of these training classes. There's always an evaluation that you'll fill out at the end on either courses that you want to have in the future or what you thought we could do to improve the course. We're open to whatever comments. At this point, I will turn our presentation back to you guys, and I thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you very much.
Lots of
Great
good information.
presentation.
That was
Thank you.
amazing. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Carlos?
Carlos, you did a fantastic job, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, if I'm not hearing any questions or comments, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for the day. Thanks again, Carlos, for taking the time to give us this information. I think it's applicable to pretty much anybody that stands up in front of any kind of audience to give any information, whether you're teaching or presenting or giving updates or whatnot. So I appreciate you taking the time. Appreciate everybody else for attending the meeting. Just a couple of reminders. Be sure to fill out a survey. Give us that information. If you're interested in serving, be sure to reach out. We've got the job posting chair that is open. And with that, we'll log off for today and look forward to seeing everybody for the Christmas party next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Everybody have a good day.
Yeah, thank you. Take good care over there on the East Coast.
Will do. See ya.
Bye. Thanks again.